Since the 2026 FIFA World Cup is not yet finished, our theme today is focused on Wilsons in the game of soccer, or football, or footy, or whatever you name the sport. We all say, Go! Hello, Cuz, and welcome to the Cuz Wilson Show. We talk about people, places, and things named Wilson. I'm your host and Wilsonologist, Kenny Wilson. Our last episode was focused on basketball because the NBA Finals were going on. Now we focus on the game of soccer because fans from all over the world and teams from 48 countries descend on Mexico, United States, and Canada for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Question: did the Scottish or the English invent the game of soccer? Should it be called football or soccer? Do you know some Wilsons in soccer's Hall of Fame? And do you know what this VAR is, and do you understand it? Well, the guy who invented it is a Wilson. And just a quick note, in the future, I'm going to make an entirely separate episode for women named Wilson in soccer because there's a lot to talk about there, too. Buckle up, cuz this episode is huge. There are so many Wilsons related to soccer that you might think Wilson's invented the game. First, I'm starting with things named Wilson in soccer, and then that will merge into our people category. Then we'll have places in soccer, and of course, we're going to have our Uncle Willie joke, and that will pertain to soccer, of course. Our news category today is all about Wilsons in soccer. Other articles about Wilsons in the news will be on our website at cuzwilson.com or in our show notes. Psst, there's a lot more to explore at cuzwilson.com. As always, a quick reminder that this is a hybrid production. I'm blending my own recorded narration, that's me talking right now, not text to AI or anything, and I have storytelling powered by AI from Google's Notebook LM. When you hear me mention Larry or Mary, those are the AI persons that I named from the L and the M from Notebook LM. But wouldn't you know it, Google has just recently rebranded the tool to Gemini Notebook. So, I don't know. I'll just keep them Larry and Mary, and I'll remind you every once in a while. Okay, it's time to kick off this show. Let's begin by clearing up some misconceptions on the name of the sport. Here in the USA, we call the sport soccer because football is completely a different sport here. Now, when I was recording this, I thought, am I going to offend some European football fans who call the sport football? Well, I had to make a decision for this recording just to keep it clear and keep it separate. So I did a little research on the origins of the terms football and soccer. And as it turns out, calling the game soccer doesn't offend most fans, and it probably shouldn't offend the other fans for some very interesting reasons. Here's Mary to clean up the different uses of the names.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the fiercest, most passionate debates in all of global sports history, the absolute linguistic war over the words football and soccer. Now, depending on where you grew up, you probably fiercely defend one term and completely reject the other, right? But what if I told you that both sides of this debate are fundamentally misunderstanding their own history? Seriously, today we're going to solve a fascinating historical and linguistic mystery that spans hundreds of years. Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the meaning of football, how the family tree divides, the Oxford slang soccer, why America says soccer, the rugby class schism, and finally, different names, same game. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The meaning of football. What's actually in a name?
Okay, let's dive into this, because we really need to dismantle a massive myth right off the bat. Most people just naturally assume the word football means a game where you kick a ball with your foot. I mean, it makes sense, right? But historically, that's actually a false etymology. See, in medieval Europe, society, and therefore sports, were heavily divided by class. The aristocratic elites played their prestigious fancy sports on horseback. Think polo, jousting, equestrian tournaments. Meanwhile, Working-class commoners played their sports on foot. So originally, the word football was just a broad umbrella term used to distinguish pedestrian, working-class games from the horse-riding games of the nobility. It literally didn't matter whether you used your hands or your feet to move the ball. It just meant it was played on foot. And let me tell you, the roots of this pedestrian game were incredibly rowdy. It was basically a lawless village versus village riot. We actually see this in historical accounts dating all the way back to 1174. You'd have these wealthy elders sitting up high on horseback, just gathering around to watch city youths playing this intense game on foot. It was so chaotic, in fact, that King Edward III issued a decree in 1363 banning football entirely. He literally lumped it in with cockfighting as an idle game that distracted people from practicing their archery.
Moving on to Section 2, the family tree divides. Rules of the game.
Let's move forward and see how this builds in the 19th century, because the Industrial Revolution changes absolutely everything. As populations exploded and railways connected towns that used to be completely isolated, these wild regional folk games suddenly had to establish unified rules so different cities could actually play against each other. It was a period of rapid codification. In 1845, students at rugby school wrote down their specific rules, which allowed for ball carrying. Then, in 1863, the Football Association formed to standardize a completely different version of the game that strictly restricted using your hands. By the 20th century, the game governed by the Rugby Football Union just became known as rugby, while the association code became so incredibly dominant worldwide that most fans simply awarded it the ultimate title of plain old football.
Section 3, the Oxford slang soccer, and our endgame.
Now, this brings us to a wildly ironic twist in our etymological family tree. Back in the 1870s and 1880s, the British elite at Oxford University developed this really quirky slang fad. Basically, they loved taking common words, shortening them, and then slapping an suffix on the end. So a university freshman became a fresher, breakfast became brekker, and when they were talking about the sport of rugby football, well, they naturally shortened it to rugger. And this brilliantly illustrates how the single most controversial word in sports was actually born. When these same elite British students needed a snappy nickname for association football to tell it apart from rugger, they hit a roadblock because the word association doesn't take an very easily. So they just extracted the middle syllable, a sock, added the suffix to make a soccer, and then very swiftly shortened that down to the nickname soccer. Yes, you heard that right. Soccer is definitely not a modern American invention. It is literally a 19th century British upper class abbreviation. Section 4. Why America says soccer. A naming conflict. So, how in the world did this very British slang term become so permanently embedded in the North American lexicon? Well, I want you to consider the geographic dilemma faced by nations that already had hugely popular established local sports by the time association football arrived on their shores. Think about it. What do you do when the name is already taken? Back in the mid-19th century, American colleges were already experimenting with mixing both association and rugby-style rules. By the 1870s, schools like Harvard leaned heavily into the rugby style, but they added their own unique American twists, like the line of scrimmage and the down system. This hybrid game became known as gridiron football. And because of its deep roots in those original pedestrian games and its direct evolution from rugby football, Americans firmly claimed the everyday word football for their unique gridiron sport. They locked that name in well before association rules gained any massive traction in the States. So we have a really simple chain of events here. Step 1, gridiron claims the word football. Step 2, association football arrives later, creating an instant naming conflict. Step 3, rather than fight over the word, Americans, alongside Australians and Canadians, by the way, who also had their own massive local sports codes, simply leaned into the highly practical, pre-existing British slang word soccer, just to avoid confusion. It honestly wasn't about being stubborn at all. It was pure linguistic necessity to tell the sports apart. All right, Section 5, the rugby class schism, amateur versus pro. Let's pivot back to the rugby branch of the family tree for a second to examine a massive divide that was driven entirely by socioeconomics. So the crucial point here is that rules weren't the only thing splitting these games up. Class was a huge fracture point. In 1892, the Elite Rugby Football Union formally charged Yorkshire clubs with professionalism. Why? Well, because working-class players up in northern England were being compensated for the wages they lost when they had to miss work to play a match. The elite RFU absolutely demanded the sport remain strictly amateur. So, in 1895, these northern clubs had finally had enough.
They broke away to form the Northern Rugby Football Union, which eventually became known as Rugby League, a distinct code that finally allowed working-class players to get paid. Now, because Rugby League was actually paying its players, it had to survive as a professional ticket-selling spectator sport, meaning it needed to be fast and it needed to be highly entertaining. To speed things up, they completely abolished the line-out and replaced the slow, chaotic ruck with the much faster play-the-ball mechanic. This thrilling, working-class version of the game spread like wildfire, reaching Australia and New Zealand by 1907 and 1908, setting up entirely new breakaway factions over there. And that is exactly why a country like Australia has rugby union, as well as heavily followed National Rugby League competitions today. They essentially inherited those exact same historic class and rule schisms straight from England.
Section 6. Different names, same game. Global heritage. Let's bring this narrative into the modern era to try and resolve our global naming conflict. Here is, without a doubt, the ultimate historical irony. The word soccer remained a completely normal, widely accepted part of British vocabulary for decades. I'm talking used by fans, printed in major newspapers, spoken on the street without a second thought. It wasn't until the 1980s that British fans actively started avoiding the term. And why? Largely because it was erroneously perceived as some dumb Americanism that was creeping in. So the English literally invented the word, used it for a solid century, abandoned it, and now criticize Americans for simply holding on to it. You can't make this stuff up. Now, what's really interesting about all of this is how the word football has totally transcended its English origins altogether. Today, the original term has become a phonetic loanword practically all around the globe. From football in Spanish to football in Thai, these cultures aren't literally translating the English words foot and ball, they're just adopting the sound of the English word to describe the beautiful game. It just goes to show how deeply shared our global linguistic heritage really is. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this question. Does the name we so fiercely argue over matter more than the incredible history that unites all of these sports? Because at the end of the day, whether you call it soccer, gridiron, rugby league, American football, or union, every single one of these games stems from the exact same rowdy medieval pedestrian fields. They are all just different branches of the exact same family tree. So the next time someone tries to correct your vocabulary, you're going to have the true myth-busting history ready to share. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.
Well, it looks like I need to make some separate videos about Wilsons in Rugby Union, Wilsons in Rugby League, Wilsons in Australian Rules Football, and Wilsons in Cricket. I think I'll do that. I'll spread them out over time. It might take a year or so because this podcast isn't about Wilsons in sports. It's about Wilsons all together of people, places, and things. I've already had episodes covering music and birds, and mountains and movies and outer space and some other themes. So it's obvious that I'm not just into sports. And I can't please everyone with every episode, but trust me, if you listen to the end, I guarantee that you'll learn something new every time. Now, before we continue and go to Wilson's in soccer history, I want to pause a little bit and give a shout out to a Wilson who set the stage for this year's FIFA World Cup here in the Americas. There's a guy named Bradley Wilson, and he's an amazing medical coordinator, and he helped prepare the medical logistics for millions of fans visiting the three countries for this year's World Cup. Without this planning and organizations of key people, we wouldn't have the quick medical attention from fights in the stands over a referee's yellow card. Let's chill out a little bit and meet Bradley Wilson.
You know, the 2026 FIFA World Cup is absolutely not just a sporting event. Honestly, it's more like a monumental logistical puzzle. I mean, we're talking about an unprecedented scale here, spanning three entire host countries, the US, Canada, and Mexico. But right behind those glaring lights and the roaring crowds, there's this massive, incredibly high-stakes medical operation working quietly, just to keep everyone safe.
62,600. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering daily attendance expected from just one single match at Houston Stadium. It perfectly illustrates the massive crowd management challenge these organizers are facing. Because think about it, when you cram a small city's worth of people into one single venue, the potential for medical emergencies literally skyrockets.
Now, step outside the stadium for a minute and picture the Houston Fan Fest. It is a completely sprawling, totally chaotic environment. You've got over 20,000 fans pouring through the gates, baking in that intense summer heat, and just reveling in all the excitement. So managing tens of thousands of fans in these wild environments, well, it requires this invisible layer of medical protection to make absolutely sure the celebration doesn't suddenly turn into a catastrophe.
So who actually builds that invisible layer? Enter Bradley Wilson, the FIFA medical manager. But, he really isn't just some administrator sitting at a desk. He's a seasoned NFL paramedic who actually helped formalize emergency protocols for the Houston Texans. And honestly, this is the craziest part. Back in 2022, Wilson survived his own sudden cardiac arrest. He literally required multiple rounds of CPR and defibrillation from his very own colleagues. So yeah, when this guy says you have to plan for the worst, he understands it far more intimately than just about anyone else on the planet.
And that intense first-hand experience translates directly into how he operates today. Wilson basically acts as the vital glue coordinating all the medical planning across North America. We're talking about developing comprehensive standards, aligning all these different EMS agencies across multiple jurisdictions, and negotiating complex contracts for localized medical services. I mean, from Miami all the way to Los Angeles, his job is to ensure a completely seamless response in these massive, high-volume venues. To really wrap our heads around the sheer volume here, let's just look at the capacity expectations for a single day of the upcoming tournament, specifically June 29th, 2026. At Houston Stadium alone, his systems have to be fully prepared to seamlessly process dozens of medical contacts, and that's everything from simple heat exhaustion to severe, life-threatening emergencies. Then, over at the Fan Fest, out of those 20,000 plus attendees, they actually anticipate even more interventions. And all of these issues, they have to be handled incredibly smoothly, treating patients without ever disrupting the games going on in the background.
Ultimately, all of this data and obsessive planning boils down to Wilson's core operational ethos. He says, you don't want people to notice medical operations. If they notice, something has already gone wrong. It's kind of the ultimate paradox of his profession, right? Absolute perfection means total invisibility. The massive crowd just sees the beautiful game, totally unaware of this immense, complex safety net right beneath them.
Which really leaves us with this one final thought. When you tune in to watch the next global mega event, will you start seeing that invisible infrastructure keeping the whole thing alive? The next time you see a packed stadium just cheering in unison, maybe take a quick second to appreciate the hidden experts, people like Bradley Wilson, who are operating quietly in the shadows of the world's grandest stages. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today.
Thank you, Bradley, for all your expertise and hard work. I would love to do a follow-up with you and learn about the stats and some stories of medical situation during this year's World Cup. Speaking of the World Cup, I want to let you know that that's not the only cup in soccer. There's a Wilson Cup from Scotland that started 25 years before the FIFA World Cup was held. There's another Wilson Cup from Northern Ireland that began in 1952. So here's Mary to tell you about both Wilson Cups in soccer.
We're keeping things brisk today to unravel a seriously bizarre football coincidence. We're talking about two completely distinct, incredibly historic trophies that just so happen to share the exact same name, the Wilson Cup. But as we'll quickly see, they have totally different legacies. To really understand this mystery, we need to look at the core contrast between the two. On one side, we've got a defunct Scottish Cup. This thing represented an absolute blood feud between two Edinburgh rivals. And on the flip side, a Northern Irish Memorial Trophy that is actually making a massive comeback today. Two cups, one name. Let's dig into the Scottish one first. Part 1, the Edinburgh Derby era, Heart of Midlothian versus Hibernian. Okay, let's take it back to Scotland in 1906. A guy named Robert Wilson, he was a Hearts director and a newspaper editor, decided to donate a trophy. Why? Well, he wanted to really elevate the traditional New Year's Day clash between fierce Edinburgh rivals Hearts and Hibs. And it worked. They played 41 intense finals before the cup was finally discontinued in 1946. Now, Hearts definitely dominated. They took home 24 victories compared to Hibs' 17. But make no mistake, this rivalry was always incredibly fierce. Every match was a battle. But check out how this timeline plays out. Just as that Scottish Cup faded into post-war history in 1946, a brand new chapter was starting just across the water. In 1952, Crusaders FC and Northern Ireland donated their own trophy, the George Wilson Cup, to honor their former chairman and, promote sportsmanship in the second tier. And if we fast forward all the way to 2025, that very same cup is actually being revived for the modern era. Which brings us to part 2.
the Northern Irish Revival, Crusaders FC, and the NIFL Championship. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this Northern Irish trophy is making its return. Up until 2019, it was purely a knockout competition, but kicking off on August 8th, 2025, it's hitting the pitch in a totally new way. The George Wilson Cup is going to be the ultimate prize for the Player Fit Championship winners. They are literally turning a 75-year-old memorial into a golden ticket to the Sports Direct Premiership. I mean, whoever comes out on top after a grueling 38-match campaign between these 12 clubs takes the whole shebang. NIFL Chief Executive Gerard Lawler really hit the nail on the head when talking about this. He said, and I quote, "This move reconnects the trophy with its original purpose, to celebrate excellence in second-tier football." It's just a brilliant approach, right? Instead of letting history gather dust in a trophy cabinet somewhere, the NIFL is actively taking its rich heritage and using it to champion the future of the game. So as one Wilson Cup returns to glory in Northern Ireland and the other remains a relic of the past over in Edinburgh, it leaves us with a pretty big question. What other lost football traditions out there deserve a modern revival? I mean, should modern football resurrect more of these defunct local derby cups to honor the sport's rich history? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this quick explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
This year's 25-26 George Wilson Cup was awarded on May 7th of this year to Limavady United, which is in Northern Ireland. No, I didn't repeat myself. It's actually located in the northern part of Northern Ireland. Squirrel, did you see how those Brits roll their eyes when they heard Mary pronounce that city Edinburgh instead of Edinburgh? It's kind of like Australians who pronounce the cities a different way than they're spelled, like Canberra, Brisbane, or Cairns. Well, us Americans, we do it too, like Louisville, Kentucky, La Jolla, California, Des Moines, Iowa, or Worcester, Mass. But Wilsonville, Oregon, it's pronounced just like it's spelled. Just ask their new chief of police, Jed Wilson. The players get all the glory, the fame and attention and big salaries, but you need a very professional team of referees to enforce the rules, the penalties, and all that new VAR technology. One of the most prolific referees in soccer history is Ben Wilson. Let's find out the backstory on Ben and see why he's so successful.
Today, we are looking at a seriously fascinating figure in world soccer, Ben Wilson. We're going to explore his incredible dual legacy. First, as an absolutely elite on-field official, and then as this trailblazing administrator who literally revolutionized the sport from the inside out. So, who actually made A-League refereeing a full-time profession? And, maybe more importantly, who introduced VAR to the world? Well, it's incredible to think about, really. A local official who started refereeing at just 15 years old in amateur Canberra competitions actually went on to fundamentally alter the global game. I mean, talk about a ripple effect, right? So the crucial point here really comes down to the number 12. That is 12 consecutive years that Ben Wilson spent on the elite FIFA panel as an assistant referee. His on-field credibility, absolutely bulletproof. I mean, he built it over 200 domestic matches across both the National Soccer League and the A-League. You just don't get those numbers without being the best of the best. And hey, his elite pedigree definitely didn't stop at domestic games. Wilson was operating at the sport's absolute peak. We're talking 5 A-League Grand Finals and some seriously massive international pressure cookers. He officiated the 2009 AFC Champions League final, the 2011 Asian Cup, and get this, the 2006 FIFA World Cup. He even stepped onto the pitch for that massive Brazil versus France match. Can you imagine the pressure? Let's move along and see how this builds, because in 2011, Wilson retired from elite refereeing, but his influence, honestly, it was just getting started. By 2012, he was appointed as Football Federation Australia's Director of Referees. So this marked a major shift, moving straight from the pitch into the boardroom. It was the start of a high-stakes administrative career that would span 7 incredibly impactful years. And this brilliantly illustrates his massive administrative wins. Wilson created a global ripple effect. Look, under his watch back in 2017, Australia actually became the very first top-tier domestic competition worldwide to implement VAR. Yeah, they were first. He also spearheaded full-time referee roles and worked directly with IFAB, the international rule makers, to allow referees to hand out cards to team coaches. That was a real game changer for improving respect on the sidelines. You see, Wilson's ultimate vision was crystal clear. He said, and I quote, "The breakthrough to professional referees means these match officials can prepare for their appointed matches in a similar fashion to the players. By contracting full-time professionals, officials finally didn't have to juggle exhausting outside jobs with the massive, massive demands of elite football. It just leveled the whole playing field." Now, what's really interesting about this approach is Wilson's core philosophy on technology. When VAR was first introduced, he was absolutely adamant that it shouldn't change how referees actually officiate. The referee on the pitch, they still make the decisions, period. For him, VAR was just simply a safety net for obvious errors. It was never ever meant to replace the human element of the sport. So here's a thought to leave you with. Next time you watch a match and you see a VAR review flash on the screen, or you watch a frustrated coach get handed a yellow card, will you remember the official from Canberra who helped make it all happen? Ben Wilson's innovations literally shaped the modern game we watch today. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep exploring the fascinating stories behind the sports we all love.
There's not too many people who have dedicated their life and careers to being a soccer ref as Ben Wilson has. Thank you, Ben. Now, before we put the blame on the referees or the players who violated the rules of soccer during the game, think about this for a second. How do the players learn the rules of the game? How do the players learn about tackling, blocking, and how to fake an injury to influence the referee? Oh, did I say that? No. No, they don't do that. Well, who recruits the players? Who mentors the players and teaches the players every aspect of the game? Who prepares the players for their professional careers in the game? Well, that's a Wilson, of course. Larry, I bet there's some Wilsons involved.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into something really fascinating. Coaching greatness, it doesn't just have one single blueprint. It takes a ton of different forms. We're actually going to look at two totally distinct paths in American college soccer to see exactly how these legacies are built from the ground up.
And as we get going, I really want you to just kind of keep this question in the back of your mind. How do we actually evaluate success in collegiate athletics? Is it, purely about stacking hardware in the trophy case? Or is it really about molding resilient young adults?
To figure this out, we're going to compare two guys who, funny enough, happen to share a last name and a profession but are completely unrelated. Over on the left, we've got Greg Wilson. He's a Division I coach who built this massive resume out on the West Coast. And then on the right is Philip Wilson. He's a true program builder grinding it out at the Division III level over on the East Coast.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. Greg Wilson's D1 Legacy.
So, looking at Greg's high-profile journey, he made this undeniable mark right out of the gate as the head coach of his alma mater, Philadelphia University. Get this, in 2005, he leads the Rams back to the postseason and brilliantly snaps a grueling 16-year playoff drought. I mean, what a way to start, right? Well, obviously, that kind of success doesn't just go unnoticed. By 2006, he packs up and takes his talents out west, joining UC Santa Barbara. And this kicked off an unbelievable 17-plus-year run. Actually, incredibly, in his very first year on the bench there, UCSB takes home the Division I National Championship. Just boom, right to the top. And Greg's legacy is totally built on this rock-solid foundation of elite professional development. He holds a USSF A license, an NSCAA Master Coach Diploma, and a USYSA National Youth License. All that deep technical expertise, it directly translates to producing top-tier players. We're talking recruiting and developing multiple MLS first-round draft picks and even U.S. men's national team players. While Greg was helping build a national powerhouse on the West Coast, Philip was laying down roots to reshape a program in Virginia. This brings us to Part 2, Philip's Averett era.
That number 12 right there perfectly illustrates his commitment. Philip spent 12 seasons as the head coach of the Averett Cougars, racking up 65 wins and developing 21 all-conference players. Honestly, that is the absolute definition of grinding it out to build a lasting culture over a decade.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Philip's focus. It was on something completely different. When talking about his team, he said character is unreal, that resilience to just keep fighting. He placed this massive emphasis on emotional intelligence. He was all about helping his young players bounce back during the really tough seasons and just teaching them how to put in the work day in and day out.
Which brings us to part 3, leaving a lasting mark.
When we pull these two parallel stories together, we really see two incredibly distinct ways of leaving a mark on the sport. Coaching journeys, they're always evolving. As of early 2026, Greg is still going strong, continuing his work as the associate head coach at UC Santa Barbara. Meanwhile, Philip actually decided to step down from Everett after his remarkable 12-season run to pursue brand new opportunities outside of coaching.
Which brings us to our final thought today. I really want to leave you with this. What legacy matters most to you when we talk about collegiate athletics? Is it all about the pursuit of championship hardware and that elite technical development? Or is it that steadfast, day-to-day dedication to molding resilient character in young athletes? It's a super fascinating debate for sure. Anyway, I hope this explainer gave you a really clear, structured look at both sides of the coin. Thanks so much for learning with me today.
I knew there had to be some Wilsons involved. They set the foundation of so many athletes and gave them a positive impact on their lives and also a positive impact on the schools they've represented. Now, there's another coach named Wilson involved too. But just so you don't get Coach Danny and Player Danny mixed up, let's have Mary set them apart.
What are the odds that the entire evolution of British soccer, from those old muddy pitches to today's high-tech scouting, could be perfectly captured by two guys who share the exact same name? Well, we're going to find out. So, to clear up the obvious confusion right off the bat, no, we are not talking about a time traveler here. We're actually looking at a dual lineage of excellence that brilliantly bridges two completely different eras of the beautiful game.
When you look at them side by side, the contrast is instant. On one hand, you've got the post-industrial grit of the elder Wilson, a 1960-born, totally battle-tested midfielder. And then on the other, the hyper-accelerated modern career of a 1991-born, heavily scouted center back. Let's dive into Section 1, the midfield general, Daniel Joseph Wilson, born in 1960. So this elder Wilson was a really tenacious Northern Irish international who became a true cup hero, basically the ultimate midfield engine of the late 20th century game. His career momentum was undeniable. He goes from securing Luton Town's only major trophy with this legendary 83rd minute equalizer to lifting another League Cup, and then he completely redefines himself by stepping up as a player manager at Barnsley. But check out this truly staggering milestone, over 1,000. Following his playing days, he joined the highly elite club of managers who have overseen more than 1,000 professional matches. Think about that. He wasn't just a player, he became this ultimate stabilizing force from the dugout.
Moving on to Section 2, the modern prodigy, Daniel John Wilson, born in 1991.
Now, if the elder Wilson represents grit, the younger Wilson is the absolute perfect lens into the intense, high-stakes pressure of the 21st century scouting apparatus. Just imagine stepping onto Europe's biggest stage at only 17 years old. In 2009, he made history, becoming the youngest player to ever make a Champions League appearance for a Scottish side during his time with Rangers. But early fame often brings what you might call the protégé's burden. After a super high-profile £2 million transfer to Liverpool, he really struggled to break past those established global stars. Yet, look at the resilience here. He crosses the Atlantic to totally reinvent himself with the Colorado Rapids in the MLS, and now he's enjoying a veteran resurgence back home at Livingston FC.
Section 3. Two distinct legacies. The evolution of British soccer.
Bringing their stories together, we see how both men beautifully encapsulate what it takes to succeed across completely different generations of the sport. And this brings us to a brilliant takeaway. Whether you're operating as a traditional journeyman manager or a data-driven modern defender trying to survive prodigy status, endurance is literally everything. It's a great reminder that longevity in any field requires constant adaptation. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Which era's archetype actually demands more resilience to survive? Is it the muddy trenches of the 80s or the hyper-analyzed modern spotlight? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep exploring the beautiful game.
The younger Danny Wilson used to play for the Colorado Rapids here in Denver where I live, and he's still playing professionally in Florida. In soccer games from the past, when midfielders and forwards had to bob and weave their way towards the goal, they met Bob and Steve. I hope Larry isn't as corny as I am, but let's see.
Let's meet some goalies named Wilson!
Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're diving straight into a really fascinating historical coincidence in the world of British soccer. It's one that's literally tripped up fans, and frankly, commentators too, for years.
I mean, it all boils down to this one question, right? Wait, which Steve Wilson is calling this match? And actually, for that matter, who exactly are the different Wilsons we're constantly hearing about on broadcasts? Let's figure this out.
Part 1. The Soccer Wilson Confusion. 3 Wilsons, 2 eras, 1 massive mix-up. Look, we're dealing with a pretty tangled web here of 3 distinct guys sharing names and sharing professions. So today, we're going to use the cold hard facts to kind of draw some boundaries around each man's career. And we'll start with the guy who famously bridged the gap between the actual pitch and the television studio.
Section 2. Bob Wilson, goalie and broadcaster.
Okay, so Bob Wilson is truly the ultimate hybrid. He mastered both the pitch and the media. During his legendary playing days for Arsenal and the Scotland national team, which was between 1963 and 1974, just for some context, he viewed his position in a super unique way. He actually described the goal as an 8-foot-high chasm. He spoke incredibly poetically about the thin tightrope that a goalie walks, facing this intense pressure that outfield players just honestly don't experience.
There's a quote that brilliantly captures his mindset. The one villain in the piece is the bloke between the sticks. There is an incredible loneliness about it. Wow, right? But here's the crucial pivot for Bob. After he retired back in 1974, he took all that deep tactical knowledge and parlayed it into a massive 30-year broadcasting career. He became the absolute face of flagship soccer shows for both the BBC and ITV.
But, his legacy is so much more than just the pitch in the studio. In 1999, Bob and his wife Megs founded the Willow Foundation. They established this incredible charity in memory of their daughter Anna, who tragically passed away from cancer at just 31 years old. What the foundation does is provide these really uplifting special days for seriously ill people. It's a beautiful way of turning personal tragedy into this powerful, enduring force for good.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the tale of 2 Steves. So, to clear up this modern mix-up, we first got to prove that Bob Wilson and Steve Wilson, the goalie, played in completely different eras. As we mentioned, Bob retired in 1974. Steve, the goalie, he didn't even make his professional debut for Hull City until 1991. They literally missed each other by almost 2 decades.
Now, let's put the 2 Steves side by side. Our first Steve Wilson made 481 appearances for clubs like Hull City and Macclesfield Town between 1991 and 2012. He was a deeply dedicated professional right there between the posts. But the key thing to remember here is that after hanging up his gloves, he never went into television commentary. Not once.
Meanwhile, the other Steve Wilson is entirely the voice. Born in 1967, he joined the BBC's famous Match of the Day program back in the late 90s. And get this, he has called over 2,500 live matches, not to mention 7 World Cups. That incredibly famous voice you hear calling breathtaking goals, that belongs to a legendary commentator who actually never played the game professionally.
Okay, let's just clear it all up once and for all with a quick summary. Bob Wilson, legendary goalie and broadcaster. He did both. Steve Wilson the first, just the gloves. And Steve Wilson the second, just the mic. It really is that simple once you just lay out all the facts.
Which leaves us with one final thought. How many other identical names have you mixed up in sports history? I mean, next time you hear a familiar name on a broadcast, maybe check your assumptions. You honestly never know when you might be listening to a completely different legend. Thanks for learning with me on this explainer today, and stay curious.
Well, not only did you have to meet the Wilsons at the goal, you had to hear about it from Wilsons behind the microphone. Broadcasters in Brazil had some fun with 2 soccer players with their first name is Wilson. I think Mary has a thing for those Brazilian men, so let's give her some alone time with them.
Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at a seriously wild coincidence in Brazilian football history. We've got 2 legendary players, both sharing the exact same first name,
Wilson. But man, they left completely opposite, totally unforgettable marks on the beautiful game. Okay, let's dive into this because how on earth do you compare a classic World Cup champion from the absolute golden era of Brazilian football with a modern cult hero? And not just any cult hero, a goalkeeper who literally just retired in March 2024. So on one side, we have Wilson da Silva Piazza. He absolutely dominated the 1960s and 70s, mostly playing for Cruzeiro. And on the flip side, we've got Wilson Rodrigues de Moura Jr., a modern stalwart from the 2000s all the way to the 2020s, famous for his iconic stints at Figueirense and Coritiba. Two totally different eras, two wildly different careers.
Part 1. Piazza, the 1970 legend.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that Piazza, born in 1943, built this phenomenal career with 566 matches and 14 titles with Cruzeiro. But the absolute craziest part? His positional shift. See, Piazza was a natural midfielder, but for that legendary 1970 World Cup in Mexico, Coach Zagallo made this brilliant, game-changing move and converted him into a center back. He dropped back to anchor the defense, which, completely unlocked that magical Brazil squad to go out there and lift the trophy.
Part 2. Wilson, the goal-scoring goalkeeper.
Fast forward to the modern era, where Wilson Jr. played an unbelievable 781 matches. And this brilliantly illustrates his legacy, the number 19. Now, that's not his penalty save count. No way. Astonishingly, that is the number of goals he scored. The guy was a goalkeeper who literally found the back of the net 19 times over his career. Mostly from penalties, sure, but remarkably, he even scored from a header and a free kick. Just wild stuff. The beautiful irony of a goalkeeper rushing forward to attack is just perfectly captured by this one heroic night in the 2016 Copa Sudamericana. Facing the Argentine side Belgrano, Wilson saved 2 penalties, and then he actually steps up to score one himself, pretty much single-handedly rescuing his team. Talk about taking matters into your own hands. Which brings us to the ultimate paradox of their legacies. One stopped goals, one scored goals, and both defied their natural positions to etch their names into football history. It's just like a giant puzzle, where the pieces were put in backwards, but the picture still turned out perfectly. So that leaves us with a totally fascinating final thought to chew on. Which legacy truly defines a footballing legend for you? Is it the classic gold of a World Cup victory, earned by sacrificing your natural position for the team? Or is it the sheer shock, the absolute thrill of a goalkeeper running up the pitch to become your team's goal scorer? Let that question linger as you think about these two incredible Wilsons. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.
Have you ever known a goalie to make that many goals? Well, now you have. It's a Wilson. Remember in our episode 8, I told you that Brazil has 275,000 people with their first name Wilson, as compared to about 44,000 people in the USA with their first name Wilson. Well, these two players are probably part of the reason for this popularity of putting your first name as Wilson in Brazil. Now it's time to talk about the Soccer Hall of Fame inductees from Canada's Iron Man, Australia's Sweeper, and America's Pioneer.
Today, we're diving into, frankly, one of the most unbelievable historical coincidences I've ever come across. It's a thread that perfectly ties together the foundational soccer histories of North America and Australia. Okay, let's dive into this. You might be wondering, what did the soccer histories of the US, Australia, and Canada actually have in common? Well, it turns out all 3 of these traditionally non-soccer nations were basically built on the backs of 3 pioneering defenders. And here's the crazy part. They were all of Scottish descent. And, incredibly, they were literally all named Wilson. Section 1. The American pioneer Peter Wilson, who lived from 1876 to 1951. Born in Scotland back in 1876, Wilson was actually an iron molder by trade before he moved over to Philadelphia. And 25 years he spent grinding it out as a semi-pro and professional player. Talk about longevity, right? He was an absolute staple on the pitch, captaining his teams to multiple American Cup victories, which totally paid off when he earned a well-deserved spot in the National Soccer Hall of Fame in 1950.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Aussie enigma, Peter Big Willie Wilson, born in 1947.
Pivoting all the way across the globe to Australia in the late 60s, we find, wait for it, another Peter Wilson of Scottish descent. Nicknamed Big Willie, this guy was a tough-as-nails sweeper. So the crucial point here is that in 1974, he proudly captained the Australian national team to their very first World Cup appearance over in West Germany, a real game-changer for Aussie soccer. But despite his huge fame on the pitch, his post-career life was a total 180. He completely disappeared, becoming a total recluse down in New South Wales. When the press finally managed to track him down decades later, he just gave them this chillingly brief quote. He just said, "There's nothing I want to say. I've got nothing to add." And that was it.
And that brings us to Section 3, the Canadian Ironman Bruce Wilson.
Now, what's really interesting here is just how relentless Bruce was. He was this incredibly solid stay-at-home style defender who absolutely anchored the North American Soccer League. I mean, 161 consecutive games, that Ironman record is just wild. It completely proved his absolute reliability before he eventually stepped up to captain Canada. But hey, that leadership absolutely did not come with glamour. Hearing him say that nobody was working and he didn't have a job really paints a picture. That 1986 Canadian squad was just unbelievably scrappy. The domestic league had completely folded, so these players were literally unemployed right at the exact moment he captained them to Canada's first ever World Cup. And right after that tournament, he bounced back to launch a legendary 34-year university coaching career. And bringing it all together side by side, the coincidence is just mind-blowing, isn't it? 3 working-class defenders, all of Scottish descent, all named Wilson, sharing the exact same foundational legacy across 3 completely different nations. You honestly couldn't script it better. It really makes you think about the working-class pioneers who quietly put in the grueling hours behind the scenes just to build the sports we love today. So let me ask you this. Looking at your own favorite sport, who are the unsung heroes that actually built its foundations? Think on that for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
Several countries have their own Soccer Hall of Fame museums, and in the early 2000s, FIFA had plans to build an official Hall of Fame in Valencia, Spain, but it never materialized. A few years later in Pachuca, Mexico, a museum was proposed to honor the cradle of Mexican football because British miners went there for work in the late 19th century. FIFA supported their efforts, and in 2011, FIFA recognized their museum as the only FIFA recognized Hall of Fame. The National Soccer Hall of Fame for the USA is located in Frisco, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, where I grew up. The next time I go visit my sister, who still lives there, I'll make sure to go visit this Hall of Fame. Well, we can't finish talking about Soccer Hall of Famers without including the UK players. An English player named Ray Wilson and a Scottish player, Davy Wilson, are both inductees in their respective Hall of Fames.
Today, we're stepping back into the explosive 1960s British football scene. We're going to look at how the left flank was, well, completely revolutionized by 2 guys who happened to share a surname, but played totally contrasting roles. So here's the crazy duality we're exploring. On one hand, you've got Davy Wilson, this absolutely lethal Scottish attacker on the outside left, and pitted against him, his southern counterpart, Ray Wilson, who was the pioneering English left back. Section 1. The Legends. Attacking verve versus defensive masterclass. Let's get right into it. You see, Davy completely flipped the script on what a winger was supposed to do. Back then, wingers were pretty much just expected to stay out wide and cross the ball, right? Not Davy. He transformed that traditional assist-focused role into a prolific goal-scoring machine. He'd cut inside and ended up netting an unbelievable 159 competitive goals, grabbing 11 domestic trophies during his iconic run at Rangers. And if you want to talk about a lethal eye for goal, get this. In just one single 1962 league match against Falkirk, Davy found the back of the net 6 times. 6. That was a club record. The guy was just an absolute terror in the final third. Meanwhile, just south of the border, Ray was busy securing an immortal legacy of his own.
In the summer of 1966, he pulled off what you could only call a miraculous double. He played literally every single minute of England's World Cup winning campaign, and he claimed the FA Cup with Everton in that exact same year. Ray was a real game changer for the left-back position. Instead of staying glued to his own half like most defenders did, he was constantly launching these overlapping runs with absolute surgical precision. His mastery on the pitch was so good that his World Cup winning teammate, George Cohen, famously described his style as unobtrusive excellence. Hits the nail right on the head, doesn't it? Which brings us to Section 2, the collision, the old enemy clashes. I mean, what actually happens when an unstoppable Scottish attacker meets an immovable English defender? Well, throughout the 1960s, the two Wilsons actually clashed repeatedly. It happened during those absolutely fierce home international championships. They were basically trading heavy blows in these legendary, high-stakes encounters that really defined a whole generation of British football. But the absolute climax of this on-pitch rivalry, that hit Hampden Park in 1962. Picture this. You've got over 132,000 roaring fans in attendance. That is massive. And in a total masterclass of Scottish tactical discipline, Davy actually scored the opening goal right against Ray's defense, ultimately securing a massive 2-0 victory for Scotland.
Moving to Section 3, a shared enduring legacy. You know, despite their completely contrasting roles on the pitch, both men tragically ended up sharing a very similar fate off of it.
Sadly, both men battled severe neurodegenerative diseases in their final years. It's a really sobering reality and honestly a devastating medical legacy that's shared by way too many players from that intensely physical generation. But ultimately, both men were absolutely rightfully inducted into their respective national halls of fame. Today, they are celebrated forever as the quiet, disciplined craftsmen who laid the groundwork for their louder, maybe more flashy teammates. They really established the modern standards for the professional left flank. So, as the modern game continues to evolve at this breakneck pace, we really have to step back and ask ourselves, how will history ultimately remember the quiet heroes who paid the ultimate price to establish that standard of greatness? Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the game.
Could you imagine being at that Wilson on Wilson game in the 1960s? Wow. Our last video is about 3 more amazing Wilsons who are still making a huge impact on the game for their respective teams. Just like Dan Wilson has made a comeback to stay in the game, Callum Wilson is doing the same thing. Harry Wilson is in his prime, and Wilson Isidore is a rising young star. Let's have Mary tell us about this incredible trio in professional soccer.
Today, we're breaking down a totally fascinating, kind of bizarre phenomenon in the 2025/2026 soccer calendar. We're tracking 3 insanely talented players who are just tearing it up on pitches all over the globe, and they all happen to share one incredibly successful name. So you gotta ask yourself, what could possibly connect the Claret and Blue of West Ham United, the Riverside faithful over at Fulham, and the international stage of the Haiti national team? I know, right? It honestly sounds like the setup to a weird soccer joke. But here's the actual punchline. Every single one of these squads is being propelled right now by a player named Wilson, who is having an absolutely massive season. We are, of course, talking about Callum Wilson, Harry Wilson, and Wilson Isidore. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1. Callum's West Ham Revival, the Veterans' Resurgence. We're starting out in East London with Callum Wilson's absolute roller coaster of a season under Nuno Espirito Santo. And the mid-season contrast here is just staggering. Back in January, things looked pretty grim. He was struggling for starts, actually holding talks to terminate his contract, with real interest coming in from Al-Shabaab over in Saudi Arabia. But fast forward to March, he completely flips the script. He proves his veteran worth and actually inks a brand new 1-year extension. Talk about a comeback. And a huge reason why is that number right there, 95. That is Callum Wilson's career Premier League goal tally. I mean, to put that into perspective, only Jared Bowen has scored more league goals for West Ham this entire season. It just proves that Callum's veteran classic poacher instincts are still razor sharp, and honestly, they've been utterly crucial for keeping them out of that relegation zone. Section 2, Harry's magnificent season, the peak performer. Now we go from a veteran resurgence to a guy who is hitting his absolute athletic prime. Just look at these stats for Fulham. 11 goals, 8 assists, all in just 38 appearances. That is literally a goal involvement every other game. And with 7 of his strikes nominated for goal of the season, it's really no surprise he comfortably took home the Fulham Player of the Season honor. He grabbed over 35% of the vote, beating out heavyweights like Calvin Bassey and Raul Jimenez.
But, despite those massive numbers, he stays incredibly grounded. He put out this great message warmly thanking the Fulham fans for their support through all those good moments. And hey, his heroics weren't just domestic either. Wearing the captain's armband for Wales, he netted this absolute magical hat trick in a 7-1 thrashing of North Macedonia to secure a World Cup playoff spot. Just incredible form.
Moving on to Section 3, Isidore's Global Rise, the Rising Star.
Okay, so let's pivot slightly from Wilson as a surname to Wilson as a first name. Enter Sunderland and Haiti sensation Wilson Isidore. His global trajectory over the last year has been an absolute blur. In February of 2025, he secures this massive move to Sunderland. Then, barely a year later, in June 2026, he isn't just playing for Haiti, he is starting in the World Cup. And the crowning jewel of it all? Scoring this headline-grabbing goal against a heavyweight Morocco side right there on the world's biggest stage.
So how is the market reacting to this rising star? Bam! 18 million euros. That is his skyrocketing current market value. His total career transfer fees have now totally eclipsed 15.6 million, and get this, he's only 25 years old. The ceiling for this Wilson, it's practically non-existent.
We've seen Callum's gritty revival, Harry's statistical peak, and Isidore's explosive arrival on the world stage. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Will it be the veteran, the peak performer, or the rising star? Which Wilson is going to have the absolute biggest impact on the remainder of the soccer calendar? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep your eyes on the pitch.
Mary made it sound like this is the year of the Wilsons in pro soccer, and I think I can agree. I told you that if you stay with me for this episode, it'd be worth it. And to prove it, that's not all. There's more. Before we move on to our places segment, let's take a little brain break and have some fun.
If you hate bad acting, you'll hate this Uncle Willie joke too.
What lights up the fans at a soccer pitch? A soccer match. See, we can fake the laughter and applause too. Our next category is the places category. And even though I have 2 places named Wilson in soccer to choose from, I'm going to save one for the episode of Wilsons in women's soccer. This place in Tennessee named Wilson relates to soccer in a massive way for the future of the game. Larry, take us to the center of America and understand how Wilson creates competitive athletes for so many youth players, from beginners to a college scholarship.
Today, we are diving right into everything the Wilson United Soccer Club has to offer. We're going to break down the facts directly from the source so you get exactly what you need to know super fast. Let's get right into it.
So, are you looking for the perfect inclusive soccer home for your family here in Middle Tennessee? Well, you are in the right place. We're going to dig into this and see exactly what makes this organization tick.
Section 1, Welcome to Wilson United. Let's look at exactly who they are.
Right off the bat, Wilson United Soccer Club, or WSUC as you'll hear it called, is a dedicated 501c3 nonprofit organization. Their whole mission is serving players of absolutely all ages right across Wilson County. And what's great is they utilize some really fantastic, accessible facilities operating out of both the Lebanon Sports Complex and the Mount Juliet practice fields.
Section 2, Programs for every player. Finding your perfect fit.
So, looking at the options, it's pretty straightforward. The Recreational League provides a really accessible entry point. It'll run you about $150 with a lower 1 to 2 day weekly commitment, and it's coached by dedicated parent volunteers. But, if your player's really looking to elevate their game, the competitive tier is where it's at. That gives you highly structured training with licensed professionals running 2 to 3 days a week. Total fees there range from $700 to $1,300, entirely depending on age and level. It basically makes it incredibly easy for families to just find their exact fit. Now, a major highlight of their competitive ceiling is this number right here, 3. According to recent USA Rank data, the WSC 2015 Girls Black competitive team is currently ranked number 3 in the entire state of Tennessee. I mean, that is huge. It absolutely proves the development pathways here yield some serious results.
And hey, the club isn't just for kids either. They actually host an incredibly affordable $45 adult 9v9 summer league. It's a super fun, open, co-ed environment that's just perfect for staying fit and active. Plus, for the younger crowds, they run these action-packed summer camps for both recreational and competitive youth players. They literally even bring in inflatable fields to keep things totally fun and engaging.
Section 3, the U.S. Strategic Partnership. A look at this strategic collaboration.
Okay, we need to clear this up right away because it's an important distinction. This is not a merger. Both clubs remain completely independent. They keep their own coaches, their own teams, and their own fee structures. What it is, however, is a really powerful collaboration. They're sharing resources, coaching education, and highly coveted elite player pathways. It's truly a win-win.
So how does this actually play out in practice? Well, first, it opens up awesome guest playing opportunities between the two clubs. Second, it allows for elite player identification. And third, it gives select WSC players a concrete, highly structured pathway to the absolute highest levels of youth soccer in the United States. We're talking MLS Next and the Girls Academy. And the best part, they can do all of this without having to leave their home club to get discovered. It is a real game changer.
Ultimately, this is a comprehensive system designed to support players from toddlerhood all the way up to adulthood. So, I gotta leave you with this. Are you ready to start your soccer journey? Because whether you're lacing up your cleats for the very first time for a local rec game or you're aiming for the highest competitive levels in the state, the Wilson United family clearly has a structured path waiting just for you. Thanks for joining me for this quick explainer, and as always, keep learning.
Wow, what an amazing program they have there. And of course, it has an amazing name to go with it. If your child is a Wilson, this podcast should be mandatory listening. So make sure you spread the word. This week's Cuz Buzz segment of Wilson's in the News is all about soccer.
And now it's time for Wilson's in the News.
Sophia Wilson hits historic NWSL scoring record with her 50th career goal. Harry Wilson has signed a 4-year contract with Leeds United. Brentford has signed former England striker Callum Wilson to a 12-month contract. Wilson Harris is back in the MLS with New England Revolution. Performance coach Sam Wilson leaves Arsenal for Parma. Now, there's more links to Wilson's in the News of other sports and other activities. So before you say goodbye, make sure and visit our homepage at cuzwilson.com and check out all the other things we have to offer there. Now, if you like what we're doing so far, please consider buying us a cup of coffee, or better yet, buy your own bag of Wilson coffee from our merch site. See ya, cuz. The Cuz Wilson Show is a product of Name and Culture Media.